Hello. So, welcome everyone to Accessible Meetings. We are excited to share practical ways to make your meetings accessible, whether it's a one-on-one call or a statewide conference. So, this session is a helpful guide designed for all staff across the North Carolina Equal Justice Alliance member agencies. I put a few housekeeping items in the chat, and I'm going to say them verbally as well. We are going to start the live transcription or the live captions. And I'm going to do that now. Perfect. Did it work or no? There you go. Do you see them, Susan?
Let me check here.
I think if you put show captions on the bottom middle, you can see
A lot of
them.
my stuff is hidden. Yes, okay, it looks good.
Okay, perfect. So I wanted to turn those on. These are auto-generated, so there might be some errors, just a little bit of a warning. This is a webinar format, so we have your cameras and mics muted upon entry. We also have the chat disabled, but you are able to use the Q&A feature, which should also be located at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to submit any questions throughout our presentation in that Q&A feature. You can also submit comments or just observations, and then at the end, we'll budget time to answer questions and address any comments that might come up. If you do need an accessibility accommodation to speak your question aloud, you can request to talk. We can allow that on our end, and then we can get your question that way. All right, so without further ado, I am Kara Policelli. I am the development coordinator here at DRNC.
Hi, and I'm Susan McLean, Director of Development and Communications.
So the purpose of today is to kind of communicate that accessibility isn't just a box to check, it's how we make sure everyone can contribute and participate fully. So we're going to walk through some concrete steps, tools, and examples that make inclusion second nature in the planning process. And we are going to start with why this matters so much.
All right, this is Susan. I'll take it over. So basically, equal access isn't optional. It's a legal requirement under the American with Disabilities Act, but even, I would say more so, it's a best practice because accessibility benefits everyone, not just people with disabilities. Captions help when it's in a noisy space or with non-native speakers. Clear visuals help all participants. And basically, when everyone can participate fully, meetings become more inclusive, engaging, and productive. All right, Kira.
All right, so it's important to note that accessibility starts in the planning stage. Accessibility should be part of your process from day one. So consider budget, timeline, and registration. When you build accessibility in early, it's easier and more cost effective than adding accommodations in last minute. And we're going to go through that throughout this presentation. Be proactive. So don't wait for somebody to ask you before you start planning for access. The goal is to be ready so that participation is seamless for everyone. So we're going to have a few of these throughout the session today. This is a do-don't example. So do ask about accommodations on a registration form. Don't assume that no request means no need. Including an accommodations question on your registration form sets the tone that your event is inclusive and welcoming. A simple example could just be, please let us know if you need any accommodations to participate fully. It shows that accessibility isn't an afterthought, so it's an expectation for your event or program. When you normalize that question, people feel more comfortable making requests.
Awesome. All right. Let's talk about needs. Accessibility starts before you think it does. It starts with the form or the process you use to track participation. So use accessible forms so that everyone can easily share their needs. Standard tools like Microsoft Forms, Google Forms, Eventbrite, or SurveyMonkey tend to address accessibility. It's best to find an accessible tool that you like and stick with it. We at DRNC have been using GiveButter, both for our donations and our event tracking. Phrase your questions inclusively, focusing on full participation instead of limitations. So like, let us know if you need an accommodation to participate fully. But also it's a good idea to state what you're offering just outright, just like in the same way you might say, vegan and vegetarian options are available. You might want to say that we're providing ASL and card services. Please let us know if there's any other additional accommodations needed. CART. CART stands for Communication Access Real-Time Translation. It's a service that provides a live person doing verbatim text transcription of spoken words. They're basically it's geared for people who are deaf, hard of hearing, or just anyone who can benefit from this written access to speech. It's also important to build in flexibility. We have found that requests sometimes come in at the last minute, and it can be okay if you planned ahead. Kira and I actually learned best practices from our vendors. One of them just said, okay, you need to set a deadline. So we now set a 2-week deadline prior to our event, and then offer to basically just do our best. Our conference website reads that requests that come in after the deadline will be managed to the best of our ability. We're not saying no, but we're also managing their expectations. Being prepared helps everyone feel supported, and it actually reduces the stress on our staff. All right, Karen, slide. There you go.
Sure. So we're going to go through a couple different types of meeting settings and talk about accessibility specifically for each one. So for virtual meetings, it's important to choose virtual platforms with solid accessibility features. So some of the standards are Zoom, Teams, and Google Meets, and those are all strong options. Consider captioning needs. So we talked about CART, and CART is usually preferable to live transcript and captioning because it's the most accurate and it's real humans providing captions in real time. However, the downside is that there's an associated cost. So if you're doing auto-generated captioning through Zoom or Teams like we're doing in this meeting, let people know at the start of the meeting and prepare for some errors along the way. Another option that can be helpful is you can caption your materials after. So if you have a recorded meeting, you can upload it to sites like rev.com, and we'll provide that resource later. And that will be a human going in after your recorded meeting to transcript, and it's very accurate. Another consideration for virtual meetings is that you should be prepared to share materials in advance. So here at DRNC, we often get that request, and we have requests that people will ask us to send materials before meetings. It helps a lot of people who might need more time to review content. Some people prefer to print out content and take notes, and it's also key for screen readers. Also be prepared to provide PowerPoint slides electronically. And if you're doing that, make sure that your images have alt text. And then there's also a really great accessibility checker built into PowerPoint that you can run before you send it out. These small steps add up and make your meeting more usable for everyone, not just those requesting accommodations. So we're going to go through another do and don't example. So do describe images verbally and don't say things like, as you can see here, without description. When showing visuals, it's important to describe them briefly so that everybody can follow along. So for instance, instead of saying, as you can see here, you can describe, this is a photo of a man on a bicycle. It's a simple practice that helps people using screen readers or calling in by phone or who might just kind of be around their house, not looking at the screen. And it also helps reinforce your message and keep everyone engaged.
Awesome. This is Susan. I'm going to take back over for a second here, talking about running accessible meetings. Okay, your meeting's set up, your accessible materials have gone out in advance, and it's time for you to run your meeting. It's important to provide instructions, housekeeping tips if needed, like Kara did at the beginning of this meeting. Don't assume that your attendees know how to access or use the tools. Normalize having speakers introduce themselves. Excuse me. We've been trying to do that here. It really does. It helps folks that are relying on interpreters. It also helps those who are participating by phone. So if you can't see who's talking, it's nice to have people just go ahead and say their name as they're speaking, especially when folks are asking questions from the larger group. It's good to say who you are, who you're with, and then say your question. An additional benefit that I found of this practice, it is extremely helpful when you're going back and doing meeting minutes to have people have introduced themselves before they start talking. Be sure to speak clearly and at a moderate pace and encourage your participants to do the same so that the either live or human type captions can keep up and your interpreters. Um, Use plain language whenever possible. Uh, as Kara shared already, describe your visuals if they're important to your content. And just kind of work under the assumption that no one can see. Everyone's driving the car while they're listening to your meeting or working on something else on their computer. Just assume they're not seeing the visual and describe it if it's important to your content. Read the chat or Q&A comments aloud so that everyone has access to being what's discussed. And record your meetings whenever possible and share the captioned presentation, the transcript, and an accessible PDF of the slides afterwards. All right, Kara?
All right, so we are going to turn it over to hybrid meetings, which I know can add an extra layer of complexity. So you must follow all the best practices outlined for a virtual meeting, and then there's a tech setup that must support both in-person and remote audiences equally. So we're going to go over mostly audio because audio is always our biggest accommodation slash technical need. And so that's what we're going to focus on a little bit. So microphones are really important to use for everyone. That way the people in person can all be heard amongst themselves, and then the people tuning in online can also hear everyone in the room. Ensuring that captions are visible to all attendees is also really important so that everybody can follow along equally. And then a best practice we like to use is assigning a moderator for both the chat and a facilitator for the in-person group to keep them both equally engaged. So somebody monitoring the chat in a virtual setting will send links, kind of summarize helpful information. And then the person in the in-person meeting will run the microphone to those asking questions, encourage microphone use in general. And then if that's kind of not possible or the meeting room isn't set up to meet those needs, that moderator can repeat questions into the microphone so that all participants can hear and follow. So that's really that added layer. And I'm going to turn it back to Susan.
Thank you. All right, let's talk about in person. Okay, the venue. When selecting your venue, you want to confirm that your space is physically accessible. Things like accessible parking, restrooms, ramps, elevators seem a little common sense and they're essential. But also you need to think about, does this space fit your needs? The meeting room capacity charts that hotels and other venues give you do not take accessibility into consideration. So you need to plan your room layout and your seating charts so that those that are using wheelchairs, scooters, other mobility aids can maneuver within that space. So if your hotel room says you can fit 350 people, it's probably more like 325. Your tables need to be more spread out, or even less. Make sure you planned in your setup that if you're using interpreters, that they have a clear sight lines to the stage and screen. So you need to make a place for them just like you do for your presenters. Build in sensory friendly spaces. This is something that we've just adapted over the last few years, but is now a standard part of our statewide conference. Need to have a sensory friendly space, such as a quiet room or a low light area, somewhere where people can get away from the bustle of the meeting. It's also nice to ask and find if your facility has a lactation room. And also, just as you start getting requests, look through the request and see what other needs you might have. When you're selecting a venue for the first time, there's realistically no way that you're going to be able to predict all the accommodations that people are going to ask for. But as accessibility becomes part of your standard operations, it becomes easier to plan some of these things ahead. And as Kara said earlier, easier to address things as they come up. So, all righty. Miss Kara.
All right, so we're going to talk about on-site accommodations. So when you are planning an event and your attendees arrive, those are the types of things we'll be talking about now. So as Susan just mentioned, it's important to review the requests that you've gotten and form a plan. So if you have requests for ASL, for visual guides, anything like that, it's important to just kind of know what those are. When planning for ASL interpreters, we usually ask our attendees to sign up for specific sessions. That way our ASL interpreters know which rooms they'll be needed in the most. But then we Our experience has been that CART is requested enough that it's usually best practice for us to schedule it for all of our breakout rooms or all of our sessions throughout a conference. We also discussed this earlier, but it is key to your success that you designate staff or volunteers to handle accessibility needs during the event. So it's important to let those people know what their job is. And that job is really just observing the accessibility needs and stepping in when needed. So, some example of how that's come up for us, we've had our accessibility volunteers guide blind participants, provide lunch buffet assistance, or kind of help maneuver wheelchairs when space is tight or into rooms to help directionally. We also like to make sure to build in breaks for rest and processing time. Accessibility also means respecting people's energy and focus. So 10 minutes between sessions is usually not enough time for many people with disabilities to use the restroom, get refreshments, kind of recharge before their next session. And then when it comes to signage, make sure your materials are clear and accessible with large readable print. If your programs are very busy and therefore very text heavy, you may also want to provide an easy to follow schedule for the day that people can read. And so then here's another do and don't example. So for your in-person meetings, do introduce interpreters at the start and don't assume everyone knows who they are. So this helps everyone know who is who. You might say something like, "We have an ASL interpreter with us today. Thank you for making communication accessible for all." It sets the tone that accessibility is valued, and then also beyond that, part of your event culture. So it's important not to assume that attendees know the interpreter's role, and clarity helps build inclusion there. So I'm going to turn it back to Susan.
You. All right, let's talk about inclusive communications. In your communications before and at your event itself, be sure to use inclusive, respectful language. An example is to use the term wheelchair user rather than saying someone is wheelchair bound. There's references on our website, which will be provided in a handout. We have one page called Disability Culture 101. And then also we have a section on our website called For the Media, and there are so many great resources on there about language and disability culture and just basically how to, things that will help the media, but would also be helpful in your work as well. Uh, be mindful of your audience. Instead of saying, "Everyone, please stand up," how about saying something more like, "If you're able to, please stand," or "I invite those who would like to stand up," or like to and can to stand up. This helps make sure that everyone feels welcome and included. Um, Inclusive communication is also making accessibility a name part of your process. Just go ahead and talk about it, make it, normalize it, make it part of what you do. In a virtual meeting, explain accessibility features at the beginning. If you're in-person meetings, be inclusive in things like your housekeeping tips. Like if you're saying, a lot of times at the beginning of the meeting, you'll say, our break is going to be at 10 and the restrooms are in the hallway. Well, what if those restrooms in the hallway are not the accessible ones? The accessible ones are in the next hallway. This is a time to say that. Go ahead and make it part of what you do. Tell people things like assistants are available. If you have people in the room that are serving as moderators or facilitators to help, point that out and have them identify themselves to the group. Put it in writing in your materials, and then also say it in your scripted remarks. And then be mindful of different communication needs and give people time to respond. For online events, this means like making the Q&A more accessible by offering multiple ways to participate. People can write in their questions, but just as Kara did at the beginning of this meeting, allow people an alternative. If you are not able to write in the Q&A, raise your hand and we'll give you the ability to speak and be heard. Likewise, the other way around. If folks need to type things in the chat and then have the facilitator read those aloud, if they do not want to appear on screen or they don't want to speak. I'm getting fired up about this stuff. Here we go.
I love it.
All right, next slide. Kara, take it away.
All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about budget and resources. So accessibility can fit into most budgets if you plan for it early. Some features are low or no cost. Later today during the Q&A, we can kind of go into more detail about actual prices, but Built-in captions or free plain language guides can go a long way. For complex or high-stakes events, it's usually our policy, though, that it is worth hiring professional captioners and interpreters. If you're interested in finding resources, partnering with local disability organizations like us, DRNC, for referrals and guidance is a really great start. And then if you know your costs are going to be increased, you might want to consider an accessibility sponsor. So that's something that we're implementing as well. We've been pitching our accessibility needs to a higher stake sponsor to make sure that we can afford all of our accessibility costs. That way, nobody gets left out. And it's a great incentive for sponsors, but then it's also an even greater outcome for the event because we don't have to, put anything on the chopping block. So I'm going to keep it going by talking a little bit about an accessibility checklist. So this is a little bit of a review of kind of what we've talked about and how to build it in. So a checklist helps you stay consistent. Usually anybody who does events will have some sort of checklist. So once you build accessibility into that, it's truly like a switch turning on. You'll kind of never not think about it. And you'll find this applies professionally and personally. I'm always going into events being like, okay, how much time do we have to recharge and rest? And is there captions and all that? So before an event, it's important to review venues and platforms. It's important to collect requests and then prep materials accordingly. During an event, it's important to monitor accessibility and then be prepared to adapt in real time. And then after, share your recordings, share your accessible materials and transcripts, and then gather feedback so that you can keep improving. So I'm going to turn it over to Susan and we're going to do a few kind of scenarios.
Yes. All right. Yes, we are going to think about a few scenarios and then what accessibility needs come to mind in these situations. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to throw out an example. If you guys would either put in what you think is needed, or it's a really good time to put in a question about what you think might be needed into the chat. And Kara's going to read those out loud and we will take it from there. So the first
And it
one we're
will
going to
be
do,
in that Q&A feature. Just want to
oh, yes,
clarify. So if you go to Q&A at the bottom of your screen, you can submit those and then we'll be able to see them all.
perfect. Thank you, Kara.
Yeah.
All right, here's the first scenario, and this is kind of how we led out when we were promoting this organization. A meeting is everything. It can be your big conference, but it also can be a client meeting. So what are some, you're going to have a client meeting. What are some things you need to consider accessibility wise?
Give people a minute to answer and then we can kind of go over some things.
And Kara, I'll just ask you a couple of questions and then we'll see, go back to the chat if that's okay.
Sure.
First scenario, let's say this is an in-person meeting
Mhm.
and the person that's coming, you haven't met them yet, but you think they are a wheelchair user.
Mhm.
What are some things you might want to consider for that meeting?
For me, I would consider kind of venue space. So how accessible is the building or office that you're hosting a meeting in? And then beyond that, I think kind of being direct and asking a question, anything else we can do to prepare for the meeting to accommodate. That's usually, where I'd start. I don't see anything coming through in the chat, but I think if
Okay.
anybody has any questions about that, please feel free to add them in.
What about a client meeting that it's going to be remote and the person that you're going to be meeting with is they have hearing difficulty. You don't really know the extent of it. What are some questions you might put around that?
Sure. I think, again, being a little bit direct, any accommodations we can provide, we're happy to provide an interpreter if that's preferable to you. If you have an interpreter you'd like to bring, we're happy to give permissions on Zoom. Just let us know if we need to send an email to anyone else. I think I might start there, just kind of being open and direct in an accessible and inclusive way.
That's awesome. All right. Let's see. The next one we have is okay, we're doing a Zoom or a Teams webinar, something just like this. What are some considerations?
I'll give people a minute to type in the chat
Okay.
if anybody wants. But if not, we can keep we can keep role playing.
Oh. But I wonder if, well, one example is that what we didn't do for this meeting, and we apologize for, is putting an accessibility question in the registration process. So that is a key thing. I'm wondering if the chat or the Q&A might not be working, but if that's the case, that's all right. We can just keep talking and figure it out. If it makes sense to try to open the chat, that would be.
Attendees can submit questions. It does say that.
Well, while you're looking at that, I'm gonna just talk about Zoom meetings and webinars real quick. I think we
Sure.
covered a lot of this in our materials, but there's a few things you can do that make your team's meetings accessible to everyone, and it just needs to become part of the routine. Captioning, we typically do not provide ASL unless it's requested. We sometimes will add that to we'll have a recorded video that we want to share with a wider public, and then we add ASL after the fact. But that's one of the things that we were talking about prepping for this meeting. There are definitely costs associated with this. I think we looked at it. ASL is typically $75 an hour. You can have it, you can have someone, of course, remote like we're doing right now, but to have someone come in person, it's also the travel fees associated with that. Anything it's typically a 2-hour minimum booking. And anything that's over an hour, you're required to book 2 people so that they can spell each other. So the cost of that adds up pretty quickly. Card services is even more expensive. It's $135 remote and $165 on site. Now, these are quotes from the vendors that we use. Prices vary. If you're specifically interested in ASL interpreters, the Department of Health and Human Services has a live list of approved and registered interpreters broken out by region of the state, and that's in the materials we'll share. But let's see, after the Zoom meetings, a hybrid board meeting. We just had one of these.
We did.
And Carrie, you were there. Was there anything that stood out to you about our needs for the board meeting?
I think the main thing about hybrid meetings that I usually notice is people are quick to claim, that their voice projects or that it's loud enough. I do think a microphone is just best practice for everyone, no matter if somebody's voice is loud or quiet, just because if people are tuning in online, it is really hard for a computer to pick up that feedback, especially if it's at the front of the table or if you're using an owl. So that's the biggest thing. I know we spent a lot of time on that in the slide, but I do think it's really critical. And then beyond that, I think, like you were saying earlier too, just having people introduce themselves when they're talking in a hybrid meeting. Similar concerns, people online can't always see whose voice is coming from where. So it's helpful to just say, "Oh, hey, I'm Kara. I have a question. I'm going to speak it into the mic." So those are some things I noticed for sure.
Awesome. And multi-day, multi-task track, multi-day conference. This is Kara has been in charge of our conference for the past 2 years, and I know has learned a lot through that process. What are a few things that you have to consider now when you book an event like that?
Yes, I would say number one is creating a timeline, just making sure that all the accessibility needs are built into that checklist and that timeline. That way I'm knowing when to check in. Booking, CART and ASL early is really helpful. That way it's kind of checked off the list and then we can, communicate with those vendors as concerns come up or as people attend that we know are going to be needing, specifically ASL services. Doing a venue walkthrough, especially if it's a new venue. We've been lucky enough to be at the same venue the past 2 years. We're moving to the Friday Center next May. And so making sure to just, those buildings usually have a pretty good reputation for being accessible, but if you have specific needs, you want to make sure to, do a walkthrough and kind of know what's what. And I think adding our kind of sensory It's not particularly a sensory room. It's more of a quiet room with a few kind of like fidgets and low lighting. But that's been really helpful and really well utilized. A lot of people, love to take a quiet break in between sessions, and events like that can be pretty rambunctious. So that's been really helpful.
The one helpful hint that I think I picked up in this past year is if you know you have attendees in your audience who are wheelchair users, take some chairs away in your room setup so they have a place, literally a place at the table. When someone comes into a room and there's nowhere for them to be, it doesn't give out a good message. So um, it's an easy thing to do, but it needs to be thought of before the day starts. I think that is enough kind of an overview. I'd love to do is share with some resources with you guys. We have just some ideas of online. ADA.gov has some great resources. We have a lot of great resources. This handout that we're providing is has links to our website and also our communications at disabilityrightsnc.org email address. Please feel free to reach out if you have questions. We'd love, by you making your meetings more accessible, you are moving our mission forward too. So we are here to give advice and support in any way we can. Um, and also in that list is the captioning and interpreters list I was sharing about earlier. And this might sound a little simple, but one of the easiest things to do is just Google accessible meetings. Universities tend to have really great guidelines because all their student organizations are doing events. So they want to have one place that they can go to and have a checklist or a best practices to how to run a meeting on campus. That is a great place to start. It gives you a kind of a list of some of the things to think about. Government agencies do the same thing. They have been focused on disability inclusive practices. So they have available checklist and ideas. And then a tip that Kara added, because I know it's something that she does, is keep a go-to resource list for staff and vendors. People are coming to us all the time needing, outside of our regular big meetings, they are needing help or ideas for someone to contact. So we have that go-to list to share, and we will happily share it with all of you. So in closing, as we said in the very beginning, accessibility is ongoing. It's not a checkbox. It's something you need to build into your planning. Build it into every meeting, every time. Once you start doing it, you stop thinking about it. It's just part of what you do. It's good to gather feedback. We're always improving, and just keep improving. And we have a section for questions, but I'm not sure if we were able to get any.
If you would like to speak your question aloud, I believe you can raise your hand and we can allow to speak, or we have a Q&A section. I know it's been pretty quiet, but if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And then I did paste in the chat the one pager. Oh, this is great feedback. Some of the hyperlinks in the one pager don't seem to be working. I will send it as an accessible PDF. That's probably the best way to do it.
Yeah.
If you signed up for today, and then that way those links should work.
Okay.
I wondered too if you downloaded if they might work, but I'm going
I'm
to.
not sure they can actually link from our SharePoint, so we might have to put it as a PDF. But what we will do is send this back out to the list of folks that were signed up today. In the next few days, Kara will get this video up on our YouTube channel, and we will put all the supporting materials with that. So please, if you enjoyed today's session or you felt like you learned something from it, encourage your coworkers to check it out. We will be sending that out as a link. Awesome.
Great.
All right.
Any other questions or comments or accessibility concerns? I know this can be tricky.
Well, I think there was, one message we want to get to you today is that's to think about accessibility. But the second message is please feel free to reach out. And if you have additional questions beyond today, and we'll be happy to help.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining. We'll close out the meeting and I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you, Kara.